Next in our program we have a panel discussion, and the topic of that discussion is human-technology interaction in energy services, and the panel discussion is moderated by Anne Pässilä. Please take the charge.
Thank you, Tuomo. Good afternoon, everyone here in Lahti campus as well as there in online. We have heard a really interesting, inspiring speeches today, this afternoon. Thank you for the previous speakers. And I have the privilege to chair this panel. My name is Anne Pässilä, as Tuomo already maybe mentioned, and I'm a senior researcher here in Lund also, so all this what we've been hearing today has been like a familiar and inspiring to sort of sense and listen. I have had a privilege to work with these wonderful and wise panelists during the years, and I can really assure you that we have here the best possible experts to discuss about human-technology interaction and the role of technology in engaging people with energy system. So you can really relax and enjoy the discussion. So before we start, I would like to briefly say something about the way we've been collaborating. And now I'm going to read this because I can carefully choose the words to describe this. So, we have often worked together in a transprofessional context. By that we mean that knowledge can develop within undecided reflective spaces through which new ways of working are discovered. As researchers, we are inspired to learn from each other, to learn about each other, and to learn with each other, and to learn from, about, and within a process of collaboration between professionals across and beyond professionals and discipline boundaries. This going beyond implies a form of collaboration where professional roles, identities, and ways of working are fluid and differences are transcended. Our panel discussion is also based on this going beyond mode of dialogue. And now I would like to introduce these wise and wonderful panelists. If I start here with Salla, Dr. Salla Annala is a postdoc researcher. Her research interests are end users' role in the energy system to enable the discovery and development of new demand response and other flexibility services and establishment of energy communities. And then we have Annika. Dr. Annika Wolf is an assistant professor whose research is in the newly emerging field of human data interaction at the intersection between complex data, machine and human learning. Her research focuses on engaging people with data through inquiry-based methods, co-creation and games. And then Suvi, Dr. Suvi Konstilaakso is a postdoctoral researcher. Her main research interest is innovation and particularly user role in innovation. She is interested in knowledge co-creation with users. Other important, interesting and related topics are living labs, as we heard today, sustainability and how to pronounce this? Entrepreneurship. It's a really difficult word. So, all you here in Lahti campus, as well as there in online, I have a little like an invitation for you, inviting you to make your own connection points regarding this topic, human-technology interaction and the role of technology in engaging people with energy system during the panel discussion. And by this, I mean that the purpose of the panel discussion is to inspire and activate your thinking and create space for dialogical mindsetting. So to say, to create space for your experiences and emerging ideas. As maybe you have noticed, the language for communication is English, because one of us is a native speaker, and you can guess who it might be. I'm sure you will discover it quite soon. So, let's start. We will first have a round across discussion where each of the panelists briefly introduce their perspective or perspectives to the topic. The question to all of you wonderful and wise panelists are, what is human-technology interaction? And what is the role of technology in engaging people with energy system? And I would like to challenge you, Salla, to start, please.
Yes, thank you. I actually prepared a slide that you can see behind me related to this topic, so why this is a really important topic. Many countries around the world and the European Union have set different climate and energy goals that are highly interlinked. For example, EU has set the goals for greenhouse gas reductions, for energy efficiency improvements, and for also how large share of the consumption should be covered with renewable energy. And another highly related EU energy goal is the empowerment of consumers and making the consumers an integral part of the energy transition. And related to this, there is recent legislation related to market rules that enable the energy communities so that people can work together with energy technologies, and also that they can provide the flexibility for the good of the energy system. And then another thing that is big in this consumer empowerment in the energy sector is the information that is provided to end users so that they can improve how they function as part of the system. And related to this, there are requirements on what kind of information should be provided in energy bills and how much information they should get about their own consumption. And this also relates to really big investments in the system, like the smart meters that have been mandated in all EU countries to make sure that this kind of information is available for people. So there is lots of expectations towards how people act in the future with the new information that they are getting.
Okay, thank you, Salla. These smart meters, really interesting, sort of got it in the end of your talk, Salla. What about you, Annika? Would you like to continue?
Yes, I can continue.
I will try to do that.
Yeah, if you do the
very high tech.
Yeah, I'm going to subvert the discussion slightly because the panel is related to human technology interaction. And as Anna mentioned already, my field is more human data interaction. So starting with the smart meters that Salla was talking about, that's one example of an energy technology. But actually there's many examples of energy technologies, so electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging points or solar panels. They're all artifacts that people can interact with, but this interaction is not normally direct. So often people really engage with these products through the data that they can generate. And I think this is very important because there can be difficulties in engaging with that data in the way that it's structured, and so often it's presented to people through various interfaces or sometimes through dashboards, and what people really interact with are these dashboards or these apps. So I think that sometimes it's important to sort of move slightly away from the technology itself and to consider this mediating layer and how effective it is. So here in the pyramid, you can see that we start from energy data. We convert that into information to make it easier for people to digest. We then use our own knowledge to make sense of it, and that can vary. So that can actually influence our ability to make sense of it. So these are issues like data literacy and energy literacy come into it, and that ultimately is what affects our ability to take action. So this is why I feel that human data interaction is an important part of this story.
Okay, thank you, Annika. Now we shift to another perspective again, and so you have also done a lot of this citizen using different types of energy research and all kind of information related to it. Can you tell more about it to us?
Sure. In our research, we have studied citizens' role and involvement in context of sustainability as a little bit kind of like a larger context than just energy. And we have studied a couple of research projects, so that Clean Acceptance, and currently we are running Helio project, which both studied citizen perspectives and their potential to respond to these emission cutting and carbon neutrality schemes. So basically in Helio project we are studying carbon footprint, which actually is kind of like one interface through which you gain awareness of how much your lifestyle is actually causing emissions. And in that picture, electricity is one of the biggest influencer, although transportation and food as well. And particularly we have focused on housing, and in that sense we have studied how different people or citizens, their awareness of the novel technologies related to housing technologies, and how they adopt this new technology and how their spreading can be advanced.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. So thank you all of you. Now we move on. Let's please dive deeper into the topic and these different perspectives. And with the help of following question, what other external factors are relevant regarding to this topic, human-technology interaction and engaging people with energy system and the role of technology in it? Can you please share your knowledge about, for example, following factors? That is, there's going to be 4 factors at least. So geographical factors such as land issues, socio-demographic factors such as lack of money or education or social capital, political factors such as various competitive interests, and socio-cultural issues such as basic assumptions. So Salla, would you mind to start, please?
Yeah, so I think the first one that was mentioned was geographical factors, so perhaps I will start with that one. And if we think about geographical aspects related to energy generation, there is of course lots of discussion on the wind conditions and solar PV potential in different parts of the world. But then even if you look within one country, there are several factors that might affect people's abilities to engage with the energy transition and new energy technologies. Like, for example, if we consider widely the energy technologies, like also consumption of energy, and if we think about transport, and even if there was a person who is willing to use public transport or car sharing services, if that person lives in a more sparsely populated area, like a rural area, it just might be that those services are not available there. Or alternatively, if the person really needs to use the own passenger vehicle, there might still be some limitations if he or she would like to have an electric vehicle, if there isn't supporting charging infrastructure, which again is more common in the cities than in the more remote areas. Then also related to heating choices, they are not the same in all locations within the country. Like, for example, district heating networks, it's not just about if you want to join, it's also if that is available in your town or in the area that you live. Or then heat pumps also, there might be some limitations in certain areas, if it's like groundwater area, or also in some really densely built city areas, there might be limitations that you just cannot drill there to make it possible. Then another quite important facilitating factor is the internet nowadays in energy services. Well, of course, getting the smart meter data into some meaningful flow might require that, but then also if we think about taking part in demand response. So nowadays, when there is more of this intermittent generation in the system, there might be a need to adjust the consumption instead of adjusting the generation. So, of course, to a certain limit, you can change your own behavior, but if you really need a real-time response, it cannot just rely on persons doing changes in their consumption. So you need automation, and for that you need reliable internet connections. For example, we have discussed with Finnish automation and demand response companies and aggregators, and they have said that even though Finland is known for quite good internet connection, high speed and high coverage, they were still surprised that in some rural areas that outages were more common than they were expecting. And if you, for example, are controlling heating during the winter time, you really wanted to come back online and not stay off if that kind of things happen. So those were some of the supporting things that people need to be part of this. And of course there are other things also, like can you afford to do some changes, but also there is about the knowledge of people, and I think this also refers a lot to Annika's message about the information and data issues.
Thank you, Salla. Bridge to you, Annika. Did this make sense, and what kind of a link you make, what Salla pointed out?
Yeah, I think I resonate very much with what Salla was saying about, also geographical and other factors you were talking about. I want to focus quite a bit on these inequalities related to people, who they are, their background, questions they want to ask of data, and these types of things. So I think going back to my earlier point about the people that use the apps or dashboards in order to engage with energy information, I think one problem that we come across is that this is often done on a kind of data-first approach, which is very opportunistic. So the technologies that we're talking about, they generate data, and this is often the starting point for developing these apps and services. So the question then becomes, how can we research this data? What can this data tell us, and how can we present it to people? And in fact, the question should be really, how can we research people to find out what questions they have from the data, what they need to know according to their own individual circumstances. So questions aren't even always asked about whether this is even the right data that we're collecting, or what other data could be used in order to contextualise it and make it more relevant to people's individual circumstances. And I think now I'm going to maybe go a bit dangerous, because I'm trying to relate back to earlier topics and talks based on very bad understanding of Finnish and small reliance on Google Translate. But I think some concepts that came up were about the neutrality or not of technology, and also how the role that we have in relation to technology may affect what we need from it, and that we should understand these very clearly. And I think this also relates to data, that people think that data is objective and somehow neutral, and that we just put the data in a certain format and it gives answers, and people then find this data sort of relevant to their daily lives. But it's not always true. Data is not neutral, and the questions you have vary depending on who you are and where you live and so forth. So I think to give one example, or I think the most simple example would be to contrast maybe a very wealthy household with a household that's in fuel poverty. For example, that very wealthy household, they might want to engage with data, smart meter data, to find out if they're living very efficiently, because they may have environmental and climate concerns, and they may want to move over to using a solar panel, and they may use data to interrogate whether this actually fits their lifestyle, if they're going to be around when the green energy is being produced, or, for example, should they invest in some battery storage. And they're looking at it from maybe this economic perspective, but mainly from an ideological kind of environmental perspective that may not be suitable to the person living in energy poverty. And this household might have very different requirements from the data. And for example, in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in Finland, but in the UK, if you're already poor, you might have a key meter fitted. And you put money onto the key and you put it into your energy meter, and then when you run out of energy, everything turns off. So it's very important to know how much you're consuming and the impact of using different appliances. So the questions for a family that living in energy poverty could be very practical. If I use my washing machine now, will I be able to feed my family and use energy to cook for the rest of the week? for example. And so even when we go to different, thinking about how this information is delivered to people and through what means, person A, the wealthy people, they might want to use a dashboard, like a simple dashboard where they can look at all their kind of energy use and different pricing structures and these things. Whereas the household and energy poverty, they might benefit more from something which just gives them very simple information, such as, do you really want to keep this washing machine load going, or would it be better to save the energy for later? And of course, we could go into other issues like we should be tackling energy poverty, and of course that's true. But this leads me to my final point, which is that often the research we do into these technologies and how to present the data to people is based on these wealthier people, and that leads to inequalities. If we did focus on looking at how we could help people at the margins and solving some of these problems, according to the principles of universal design, we also solve problems for everybody. So it's actually useful information that everybody can benefit in the end. So I just want to highlight these inequalities and how they come through.
Thank you, Annika. Did this make sense to you, Sui?
I think it does very, very much. In our research, we actually conducted with the detached houses. The money is actually quite big motivator for people to start to look at their different options and whether they could save energy and with what technology. And I think from individual perspective, actually choice of housing, what type of a house do you live in, it's actually quite important, and whether you own it or not. And this decision actually leads you to very different position in terms of how much you have to interact with the energy system and the technologies related to that. So basically, people who live in a detached houses that they own, for example, they have freedom to choose the technology. They have the responsibility to, if they want to install solar panels or some other, they can do it. If they have the knowledge, if they have money, and they want to do that. But on the other hand, if you live in a rental apartment, you may not have that choice. And for example, these private housing cooperatives in Finland, where a group of people own their own flats in one big building, they are not probably the most easier places to make decisions together about installing solar panels or even installing charging points for electric cars. It depends so much on the other apartment owners and about the culture in there and about their people's motivation to own a building if they see that it somehow makes sense. So that is actually the choice of housing and type of ownership you have is an important factor. As Salla was mentioned about the district heating, here in Lahti we are actually in really good situation as our district heating is produced by renewable energy. So basically all households and people who are using that enjoy that kind of a lowering effect on the carbon footprint. But also here in Lahti, we have noticed that we have quite, advanced municipality-owned rental house company that is installing different technologies for their apartments. And they are actually currently running a EU-funded project where they install different kind of a technology, like novel thermostat for batteries or heat pumps or things like that to different kind of houses. And then they are a little bit comparing what kind of effects they are gaining. And if I remember correctly, one apartment building was also given just instructions for the citizen how they, or the residents, how they could change their behavior. So I think they will receive quite interesting data about the effect of different technologies. But basically, people living in these institutionally owned buildings enjoy the fact that they don't have to calculate, is it worthwhile to install, for example, solar panels. So that housing decision, which kind of is typically made from some other perspective, like is it close to home, do I like to live in a big building, or how I want to live, actually defines how you interact, or how deeply you have to interact with the energy system. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting, and as I invited you at the beginning to reflect your own connection points, I will do it mine one here. So all what you have now pointed kind of resonates to me. This kind of which I'm how to say, not surprised, but kind of a new thing for me is this, that really important seems to be this, that we take account of this democratic equality when we design and manage this technological interaction and the role of the technology. So this is also a challenge for you there in online and here to make your link. We will come up to these links a little bit later on. Now we are heading to kind of an end of this panel, or how to say, we already see the end of the panel here. So last but not least, I'm inviting again all of here, as well as there in online, to imagine possible worlds and solutions related to these issues, and also imagine the positive actions. And maybe like the previous speaker Satu talked about the different levels, also thinking these different levels of actions, and to think that what would be your action be. So the big challenging question, how to solve this issue in approximately 10 minutes.
Yes, big question. But what I got from this discussion was that people's opportunities to engage with the energy transition, they really depend on various factors, like whether they live in an urban or rural area, yeah, in that sense, and whether they live in a detached house or in a housing cooperative, whether they get actually information that is meaningful for them, and whether they can afford to make some investments. If you are already struggling with energy poverty, you perhaps are not the one to install the solar panel, even if there would be some subsidies available. So even though it's important to make these policies and incentive mechanisms that support people being an integral part of the energy system and behaving in a way that it functions efficiently and sustainably, you still need to consider also who might be excluded from making these changes in their behavior, and make sure that when you design new incentives or any policies, that the ones who are already struggling don't end up struggling even more.
Thank you. Yeah, this is really important point. And Annika, what would you?
I'll go back to what I was saying earlier about the sort of data first or people first. I think we need a people first approach to all the research that we do into these different apps or the services or the ways that we connect people with energy systems, so that we can actually empower people to make decisions that are relevant to their own personal circumstances and not based on, the prior assumptions of the others and all the people doing the research. And I think this inclusion, means that we need to do participatory design processes. We need to involve the marginalised communities. We need to actively try to hear their voice, amplify their voices in the design process. And I think just finally, just a pointer forward to one of the reasons that I like collaborating with Anna so much is that we, she has a background in this arts-based research, expertise in this and the participatory design, and I come more from the technology, and I think that this interdisciplinarity has been very useful for us in exploring these projects and will be also in the future in our upcoming projects. So I think multidisciplinary approach is very important, and I think that was it.
Thank you, Annika.
I agree with you with the ideas that we actually really need more nuanced or refined perspective to different citizen groups. Because currently, I think, particularly if we think about how to live a sustainable life, it's quite like one size fits for all type of advices. It doesn't take into account different life situations or age, for example. And quite timely issue on energy consumption is that our society is aging quite rapidly, and some research, international research, has found out that energy consumption increases as the people are getting older, their households. And they haven't actually figured out the reason why this happens, but it takes place in Japan and UK, for example. So basically we have to understand that life situation, and we cannot just look solutions that seems to be quite common for everyone. And also hearing those different kind of groups and who's excluded and included in this discussion is important. And as people have different life situations, they have different capacities, whether it's physical or emotional or financial. For example, elderly people, when they have declining physical abilities, they are more dependent on private cars, for example. And we need kind of like actions that take into account these different, quite normal differences in people capacities. And for example, in our younger generations, they are more open towards different kind of actions. They like sharing economy services and things like that. So I think this inclusion and exclusion point is something that should be more visible and maybe more taken into account also in research.
Yeah, thank you, Suvi. All right, now we have this kind of this part of the panel discussion over, and now I would like to invite you here in campus as well as you there in online. You can a little bit like lean on and give a space to reflective thinking. And here I will invite you to maybe go to next someone and have a little, maybe few minutes, maximum 2 minutes talk about what did you hear on this panel. So a little bit reflect what did you hear, and then maybe beyond this reflection also that maybe you could talk a little bit, really lightly, the possible worlds and what kind of action you might see in this possible world. So be a little like shifting this hopeful scenarios at the end. So a few minutes talk to someone next to you, please, and you there in online, you can sort of reflect and lean on, and if you don't have anyone there in online, then you just need to your mindful thinking on your own. So a few minutes and then we come back to your point of views. Could we now please turn to this end reflection? Anyone would like to have a comment or share your point of view of what you were talking? Anyone? Thank you, Helena.
Many thanks. This was really interesting. You brought up so many various different kinds of viewpoints that are really important in this topic. I was also really interested in hearing about these age-related issues, and I actually didn't know that energy consumption increases as you age, but I can actually think about a couple of reasons for that, possibly. Perhaps the household or the home needs to be a bit warmer. That could be one. And then perhaps people cannot afford to buy newer technologies that then consume less energy. Those might be some of the issues behind there. But I don't really have any question, but this older people's situation has been worrying me a lot recently, especially because we see the rising energy prices. So what do you think? Is just acknowledging their diversity, is it sufficient, or what could be done to really help older people to become engaged?
I seem to have the mic. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I also was interested in this when you brought it up about the older people, and I wondered as well that when people get older, they're also maybe staying at home more, and for that reason that their energy consumption will be rising. So I don't really have an answer, but I just thought there's maybe many reasons, but we should understand those reasons. So that goes back to what I was saying before about the people first. And I think we do tend to focus on technology sometimes a bit too much, and especially as researchers, we sit in our rooms and we need to get out to speak to people. So.
Well, that was a good point, that perhaps the older people, they are home more, so they consume more. That is one thing. But I was also thinking about the ability to invest in energy efficient appliances. I was recently in a seminar in Belgium where they were presenting some interesting cases of how to help people who perhaps cannot afford new appliances. That was more about people who have purchased a house that was at their maximum limit that they can afford and perhaps wasn't as energy efficient as it could be and didn't have efficient appliances. But there was this program where they were actually renting these energy efficient appliances. So then in that case you don't need to do the big first investment. So that's one interesting initiative on this, how to make it possible.
Yeah, that made me think that in that case it goes back to the information, because then people, even if they're renting versus buying, they need to have good information to answer the questions to decide, is it because obviously renting something long term, you actually end up paying more sometimes, so you need to be able to balance these things off against each other.
I think it would be interesting to know if this same phenomenon takes place in Finland. If the aging households, actually the energy consumption increases. So that is something that would be one further research topic.
Okay, thank you. We are now finalizing the panel. Thank you for wonderful wise panelists, and maybe the one sort of thing I would like to leave on the air. As a humanist, we haven't not touched yet too much about energy, like awareness being an energy, or mind setting being an energy. So I would like to point out that we are in a time that we need to also keep hope And I love the concept non-stupid hope. I don't go there where it is coming from, but we really need to cherish this non-stupid hope, which will be an energy for action for sustainable solutions, whether it's these topics you pointed out, these elderly citizens or youngsters or whomever. So non-stupid hope for us and good will to cherish that energy. So näin kuvin ja tunnelmiin päätämme lähetyksen täältä Lahti-kampuksesta panelistista. Thank you.